Hey DCA family, this is Kurt. If you're watching this on video, you can see my messy studio office here. Excuse the mess, just finishing up editing this week's podcast. If you're just listening to this on audio, make sure that you go over to our YouTube and Rumble pages. We are updating our podcast to include some more graphic elements, some more video drops, things that you're going to want to see rather than hear. If you're just listening to the audio, of course, that's fine too. But if you haven't already, make sure you go over to YouTube and Rumble, subscribe to the channel, like our videos, share our videos, tell your friends, all that good stuff. In addition, we have some exclusive content that is only available on the video platforms. This includes some interviews that we'll be doing. Just last week, we did an interview with Mike Brown for Kansas Secretary of State. We have many more interviews and other good things planned for you guys coming up very soon. We're really trying to expand. We're trying to create new content, trying to update things as much as possible to keep it entertaining for you, the viewer, and you, the listener. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this journey on the Dale Carter's America podcast. As always, make sure you follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Dale Carter's America. We have many more things coming up soon. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy this week's episode.
With 245 days until the midterm election, war continues in Europe. Is it time to bring back the Carter, and not the Dale Carter, but the Carter-era misery index? Do you remember that, Kurt?
I wasn't alive then.
It could be time to bring it back. And the Democrats are lining up for a circular firing squad. All that and more on this week's episode of Dale Carter's America.
From the heart of flyover country, he's not on the far right, and he's certainly not on the far left. Like you, he's somewhere in the middle. This is Dale Carter's America.
Well, let's start with the news of the day. We're almost 2 weeks into this incursion the Russians made into Ukraine, as Biden called it. Maybe a little incursion, a small incursion, right?
Yeah.
Which may have given
minor inconvenience.
Vladimir Putin like the green flag to do this.
When Biden said before, minor incursion.
A minor incursion, little minor incursion. So far, that minor incursion has cost the lives of 400 civilians and counting. 1.5 million people have fled Ukraine. And my take on this, yours may be different, is that Biden's terrified of Putin.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is pretty clear. I mean, I think the American politicians in general don't really know what to do. And you can't blame them because they kind of put us in this situation in the first place. So they don't know what they're supposed to do because it's too late. It's too late to do anything about it without causing World War III. So
last week was the anniversary of FDR's famous speech in 1933. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And I mean, a Democrat who inherited a depression, the only real big depression the country's ever had, he inherited it. And then we got into World War II, right? Fighting that against the Germans and the Japanese, not to mention the Italians. I mean, and FDR got us through that. And here we are today. These are the politicians we have today. You have Joe Biden. And the question becomes, should Russia be booted from the Security Council? They are a permanent member of the Security Council. All that came out of World War II. And Jen Psaki says it's too soon. It's too soon to even think about that.
I think the better question is, why should we still take the UN seriously at all?
No one does.
No one does. Why do we care about the UN? Seriously, I mean, I've said this before, but I mean, I think, again, we'll get more into it. Say what you want, good or bad. Obviously, what Putin is doing, he's invading another country, but I think he understands that nationalism is the future of global politics, and I think that America needs to understand that too. We can't look to the UN, we can't look to NATO. We have to look out for America first. And the UN, I mean, like you said, Russia's on the Security Council of the UN. Yeah. So why are we taking the UN seriously? I don't get it.
Well, we shouldn't be. And then the next question to Psaki is Vladimir Putin a war criminal? And she's hedging on that. We're not sure if we should label him as a war criminal. Tell me how he's not a war criminal. He invaded a sovereign nation.
But what does that mean? What is the significance of that? What is the point?
I mean, as a practical point, you're probably right, because you're not going to haul him before the court at The Hague and like the Nuremberg trials after World War II,
right,
and execute the guy. I don't know. maybe that's a reason for a no-knock warrant at the Kremlin.
And they're not going to do that. And I think, getting back to what we talked about last week, this is all virtue signaling.
Right.
We're going to talk about the State of the Union. They started the State of the Union basically as the state of Ukraine. Everyone had Ukrainian flags that they were waving, and they had Ukrainian pocket squares. They never do that for America. They never wave American flags or
they
anything
try,
like that.
And we're going to get to that in the State of the Union.
Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but the point is that she's saying, "Oh, he's a war criminal. Should we call him a war criminal?" What does that mean? Like, I think what it comes down to is, are we sending American troops or are we not sending American troops?
Well,
and I think the question that people need to ask themselves is, would you rather see Ukraine taken over by Russia, or would you rather see American soldiers go die to defend Ukraine?
You should open a history book and look at what happened in 1938. If we were doing this podcast in 1938, you might be saying, Hitler's taken the Sudetenland. Who gives a shit?
Well,
right?
I think there is a decent argument to be made that, we could have just let the Nazis and the Soviets take each other out in World War II, but I don't know. It's speculation, and I wasn't there. So
all right. So also in the news about Russia is whether we should ban Russian oil or not. And this is where we get into the circular firing squad. And I'm going to talk a lot about the circular firing squad coming up here in a little bit. But even Nancy Pelosi is saying we should ban Russian oil. Jen Psaki is saying it only represents 10% of our oil. And if we did that, prices would go up even higher than they are right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then are they considering, expanding American oil as part of that? Or are they just talking about,
we'll get into all
Russian
that.
oil.
I know this is one of your hot buttons because Lindsey Graham was on television saying what we need in Russia is a good Brutus to take out Caesar, right? And so now the left is jumping all over him because he's saying, he's sanctioning assassinating a foreign leader. And I don't think that's what Lindsey said at all. He said somebody in Russia needs to do us a favor and take out their own guy.
Right. But even then, it's such an idiotic thing to say. What is the implication of that? It's like, it's like all of the other things that we've done. In other countries, we've taken out leaders in other countries, and it just leads to a power vacuum. It's just going to lead to more chaos. Even as a practical matter, it's not realistic.
All right.
So,
well, let me ask this burning question that I have. All right, Putin is in Ukraine right now. I don't think that's his last act. Okay, what if he goes into a NATO country, and then he says, you know what? If you come at me, I've got nukes and I'm going to use them, because he's already used nuclear blackmail. So he goes into a NATO country that we have a treaty with. Article 5 of that says an attack on one is an attack on all. What do we do?
Well, I think that there is maybe a better argument to be made for some sort of military action in that case, but it's tough. It's really tough because we're coming from a place of weakness. We're not coming from a place of strength like we were under Donald Trump. Donald Trump said, if he goes into Ukraine, he's going to bomb Moscow, and I think Putin was at least wise enough to take him seriously, whether that was a bluff or not, but he was positioning himself from a place of strength. Yeah. Even if you just look at the way that they interacted in person, you could see that Trump was not messing around with the guy. And I think that should be the policy of America, broadly speaking, is, peace through strength, speak softly, carry a big stick, all of that kind of stuff. And that's just not what we're doing right now. So I think it just depends on how far Putin thinks he can take this without consequences.
Well, we'll see, because we're 12 days into this, and it doesn't appear like it's going to stop anytime soon. FEMA is out, by the way, in case you missed this, with guidance for nuclear war. Did you see that?
No.
This is a true story. If you go to the FEMA website, they have guidance for nuclear war, and it says to wear a mask and socially distance.
Right. Very important. I'm glad they mentioned that. Very
These
important.
are the people in charge of our country right now.
Yes.
FEMA.
Also, I don't know if you knew this, but nuclear weapons, the nuclear fallout, when you get bombed, it actually targets the unvaccinated over the vaccinated.
Is that right?
If you're vaccinated, you have extra protection against nuclear fallout.
And then John Kerry is out with this statement: this silly little war in Ukraine is getting in the way of the important work of climate change.
Yes. I think we talked about that one last week, unless he made a different statement.
No, I
which
think
he probably
all
has.
right. Well, I'll take that out of my notes for next time, but it's funny enough that I think we should have it in there.
Yeah.
Okay, under the category of the news here, this is Media Bias 101. We haven't picked on the NBC Newswire that we have here at the station for a while, so I'm going to pick on him with this story. Here's the headline. New poll, U.S. satisfaction improving, but still low. Okay, here are the numbers. A Gallup poll says just 21% of Americans are happy with the nation's direction. That's an improvement from January's 17%.
I'm just thinking about like using this as leverage in like your relationship, like satisfaction rate improving, but still low. Don't hate me.
Now, here's my thought was, if Donald Trump was still president, how would these numbers, be reported? 21% happy. That's up from 17%. So their headline makes it seem like it's a happy thing. It's a trend line. It's moving in the right direction.
Yeah. Well.
If Trump was president, it would be, the dismal numbers continue.
Right.
Death and destruction in America. But this is the that's why we point out media bias here. Transgender update, because why not?
Sure.
We talk about this once in a while. I was kind of interested in this. Utah is not a place you would think of transgender rights being, front and center. Mm-hmm. But the governor there is going to veto a bill that bans transgender athletes from participating in girls' sports. He's a Republican governor, and he says he's vetoing it because there was no public input on the bill. It had never been talked about. The legislature just did what the legislature does, and so he's going to veto it.
Yeah, well, this is the first time hearing about it, so I'm basing my opinion completely off of what you just read. But if that is a true and accurate representation of the story, then he should be immediately kicked out of the Republican Party.
Well, we'll see where it goes, because I'm sure they have an overwhelming Republican majority in the legislature. Utah is a bright red state. The governor's promise to veto the measure goes against what Iowa's Republican governor recently did. Similar measure there. The governor there, Kim Reynolds, says that making girls compete against men isn't inclusive or fair.
Yeah, and another story related to that, too. I don't know if you have this on the docket or not, but Leah Thomas, the trans swimmer that everyone's been talking about, apparently there's a big NCAA swimming tournament coming up, so we're going to see what happens with that, if he breaks a bunch of records or whatever. But that's going to be staying in the news for a while, too, with that.
Well, you've seen Vicky Hartzler's TV commercial. Maybe we should throw that in here. Just as a clip.
Sure.
Because Vicky is all over that. Now, I'm not sure that is the burning issue of the people of the state of Missouri right now. I think there are other issues out there, but she's trying to separate herself in a very crowded field for the Republican nomination for Senate, and she's decided to take on Leah or Larry or whatever his name was before.
I don't think it was Larry, but
it's a pretty funny spot.
Yeah.
So we'll throw that in here.
Meet William Thomas, ranked number 462 in men's swimming. Meet Leah Thomas, ranked number 1 in women's swimming. Only one problem. It's the same person. Some people are afraid to talk about it. Not me. I'm Vicky Hartzler. I ran and coached girls track, and I won't look away while woke liberals destroy women's sports. Women's sports are for women, not men pretending to be women. I'm Vicky Hartzler. I approve this message.
Twitter suspends Missouri Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler's account after she tweeted, "Women's sports are for women, not men pretending to be women." Twitter suspended her for violating its rules against hateful conduct. Hartzler pointed out even Vladimir Putin is allowed to tweet right now.
And I know that you'll be thrilled about this. Lynching is one step closer to being a federal crime. The Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act passed the House with nearly unanimous support. So I guess my question here is lynching still a thing?
No, I mean, not that I'm aware of.
I mean, you talk about virtue signaling.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, forget all of the issues that we are actually facing right now. Forget, I'm assuming it's supposed to be this racial justice kind of thing. I mean, forget the poverty rate, the single parenthood rate, the murder and crime rate in the black community that we have right now. What we need to do is focus on lynching. Because
this was put forward by a Democratic congressman from Chicago. Don't you think they have bigger problems in Chicago?
Well, Jussie Smollett did get a noose around his neck in Chicago by two MAGA hat wearing racists.
Which the truth of that came to be that he put it around his own neck, and it
was two gay Nigerian men.
Oh my God. All right, so that's so under the bill, you could go to prison for up to 30 years for committing a lynching. I'm a white guy who lives in a suburb, so I'm really out of my depth on this. But I would think if I were a black person who lived in the inner city of Chicago, I would be far more worried about somebody driving by, rolling down their window, and shooting an Uzi at me than I would be a bunch of white rednecks coming down the street with a rope.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
does that oversimplify it? I don't know.
No, not at all. I mean, it's honestly, it's just funny when you think about it. I mean, it's hard to you can either cry or you can laugh, I guess.
And we try to laugh on both my radio show on KFKF and on the podcast. I think we should laugh. Speaking of laughter, the State of the Union. Did you watch any of it?
I did. Yeah, I did. I know you were probably sleeping.
I slept through it like a baby.
I subjected myself. Just for you, just for the listener and the viewer, I subjected myself to the State of the Union. I had a tall glass of whiskey just to get through it, and I was live tweeting the whole thing.
You live tweeted the whole thing. So since you watched it and I only saw it in clips, why don't you go first with your observations?
Well, I'll start with the best first, I guess. So the best part about it was that Joe Biden is too senile to understand that he's supposed to stop for like applause lines, and he's supposed to deliver the line and then let it breathe and let people stand up and clap, for a minute and a half or whatever it is. So he just plowed through the whole thing. It didn't feel quite as long as a lot of other State of the Union speeches. So that I thought was great. That was the best part about
it. Back to when he was vice president, he would stand behind Barack Obama in the Rose Garden and the sun would get in his eyes. I made the connection that he looked like the puppet Walter from Jeff Dunham.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, there's a whole thing on that. You can Google Joe Biden, Jeff Dunham. He looked much more like Walter the puppet up there because he was squinting. I mean, he couldn't read the teleprompter. And like you said, he kept stepping on lines. There was one line, and I saw the thing in clips, where, it was a really good line that if a Ronald Reagan or a Bill Clinton, to keep it bipartisan, delivered it, they would have stood back and just let it breathe.
Right.
And the Congress starts going, USA, USA. And he just kept talking, though.
Yeah.
You let that breathe.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there was definitely some cringeworthy moments. I think the best, there was two in particular that I'll drop clips for. One was, I don't know if you have seen either of these, but one was Chuck Schumer standing up and then like sitting back down and then standing up again. Did you see that one?
I missed that one.
Unlike the $2 trillion tax cut passed in the previous administration that benefited the top 1% of Americans, the American Rescue Plan helped working people and left no one behind. Folks.
That was really good. And then the other one was Nancy Pelosi. For some reason,
yeah, okay, I do have that.
There was this big applause line where Joe Biden was talking about toxic smoke and burn pits.
Right.
Yeah. Just like, what does that even mean? And Nancy's like, ooh, toxic smoke.
And she stood up and it's like, she was like rearranging her dentures. I mean, the mouth
great.
Features. I mean, it was like.
Great. And our troops in Iraq in Afghanistan have faced many dangers. One being stationed at bases breathing in toxic smoke from burn pits. Many of you have been there.
What the hell was that?
I have no idea. But in terms of the actual content of the speech, I mentioned this before, and maybe we'll get more into the Ukraine thing, or I don't know. But the first bit of the speech was just all about Ukraine, and it was all virtue signaling, and it was just pathetic. I mean, the flags and everything like that. Let me just make something clear. This is my opinion. These people do not give a shit about Ukraine. They don't care about, the Ukraine versus Putin thing. They've put us in this situation. They've put them in this situation, and they're doing nothing about it. They don't care. They're just virtue signaling. They're trying to, because it's the new cause of the day. It's the new COVID. It's the new, racism. It's the new thing that everyone's talking about, that everyone's putting the Ukrainian flag in their profile picture, and it's all just fake baloney. And that was the first part of the speech. And when they came in and they were waving the flags and everything like that, I'm like, what country is this?
Yeah.
What country is this? What are we doing?
Well, and I get that a lot of people can't find Ukraine on a map, and nobody really, I don't think anybody cares about it in terms of national security. But again, I get back to, We have weak, feckless leadership right now. Weak, feckless. He makes Jimmy Carter look like FDR. I mean, that's how feckless things are right now. And the Chinese are poised. I mean, they're looking at this. They have a great interest in this. What happens when they go into Taiwan?
Yeah.
What happens when Iran builds a nuclear weapon and decides they want to use it on Israel? What happens when Putin, after he takes Ukraine, decides he wants to go into Poland? I mean, there are a lot of things out there that we ought to be taking really seriously right now.
Yeah, no doubt. And and then kind of, I guess, the rest of the speech was more or less just kind of gaslighting, like fake optimism about, the direction of the country. You can look at Biden the day before the speech and the day after the speech. He was outside by himself giving speeches wearing a mask.
Right.
And during the State of the Union speech, nobody in the whole room was wearing a mask.
Right.
So the whole idea is, COVID's over. We
predicted that.
We solved COVID.
Hey, we talked about this on the podcast. I told you March 1st would be the day that it would officially be over.
Yeah.
And because that's when Joe Biden's giving the State of the Union address.
Right.
So COVID is officially over. So smack on the wrist for a couple of Republicans who could not help themselves yelling out during the speech, because that became the line, or that became the story, the headline on MSNBC and CNN. They were looking for a way to make this about Republicans and not the feckless leadership that we have. So shame on them for yelling out. At a time, when your enemy is destroying himself, the last thing you should do is throw them a lifeline. Stand back and watch the carnage. The circular firing squad is amazing. I mean, they had a Republican reply to the speech, as they always do for the opposing party. This is the first time in history that someone in his own party gave an opposing speech to the State of the Union address. Because what Biden, I think, maybe not Biden, because I doubt he knows what day it is most days of the week, but the people behind Biden, Ron Klain and all those people running the West Wing, what they are trying to do is straddle this line between the center of their party and the far left of their party, and they're not making either one of them happy.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
so why would you get in the way?
Well, let me just start with this. I think the idea that, this is going to be fodder for the media, they're going to jump all over this, that's just... It's not a winning mindset. It's just, who cares? They're going to do that either way. It's like, it's like Trump and the mean tweets. Oh, look, they're going to say bad things about Trump because he's doing mean tweets. Do you think they're not going to say that about somebody else?
His mean tweets, by the way, led us to Joe Biden, to where we are today.
But I'm not trying to get into all that. I'm just using that as an example. But the framing what we're doing, or framing our narrative or our tactics as conservatives or as the right wing, as how is the left going to react to it, how is the media going to react to it, is just a losing argument, in my opinion. And I have no problem with what they did. And I think that, first of all, they were correct, because they were pointing out, it was Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene who made the news. They were pointing out that Joe Biden essentially killed 13 service members in Afghanistan by his terrible pullout in the situation. They're bringing attention to the issue because obviously he's not going to talk about it and the media is not going to talk about it. And as I've said last week, and I'll repeat again this week, the State of the Union in general, not just because of Joe Biden, but especially because of Joe Biden, it's a freaking joke. And, maybe we should have more of that. Maybe we should have more people pushing back, and more people, causing a scene or yelling out or whatever, because it's just it shouldn't be taken seriously.
All right. Well, we'll disagree on that.
Yeah, agree to disagree. This is why this podcast is so good, because we can disagree.
I think they should have kept their mouth shut and let Joe flail aimlessly as he has been doing anyway. The circular firing squad continues on other fronts. Right now, there are tensions between the green agenda and conservationists about land use and mineral mining to get to what Joe says will be a complete wind and solar economy by 2035. Folks in California are pushing back, saying, wait a minute, to get there, you've got to make all these pristine fields into solar fields.
Right.
Okay. So there's pushback. They're fighting each other over these things. And then the minerals that are going to have to be mined in order to make these hideous batteries for electric cars. They think green energy is clean. Green energy is, in fact, very dirty.
Yeah. We've talked about that before, where the cobalt and the other materials come from, like child labor in the Congo and all kinds of crazy stuff. And certainly what you're saying is correct, that this idea that green energy, has no impact on the land or no impact on the environment.
Never mind, it's not even feasible.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. It's just not true. And, just to make a broader point, I guess, I really do think that people have this misunderstood idea about conservation, like where they think that Republicans just want to destroy the environment or Republicans don't care, conservatives, don't care. If you talk to like blue collar, like Republican ranchers, hunters, people like this, these are the people who are actually like on the ground and actually know the land and actually know what's best for the land, and I think that gets lost in the conversation.
You don't think Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas knows about conservation and what you ought to do with your life?
I don't think so.
What a buffoon. What a clown.
Yeah.
And yet, she's in the news all the time. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, they control the narrative. So, I mean, of course.
Okay. Here's where I would have applauded Joe Biden's speech. He would never do this. John F. Kennedy would have done this with these same circumstances. I think LBJ would have done it. Harry Truman certainly would have done it. FDR would have done it, just to make the point that there are Democrats out there who would see what's going on in the world right now. If he would have stood up and made energy independence our national goal, it's like, okay, everything that's going on now, we need to change course. Okay, we need to become energy independent. Democrats are saying that now on Capitol Hill. He's not saying it, but there are Democrats on Capitol Hill that are saying it.
Yeah.
If he had done that, he would have gotten the country behind him.
There's a couple that are saying it from what I've seen. I mean, you pointed out Joe Manchin. Maybe there's a couple more. But like when you hear him talking about reducing energy dependence on Russia or Jen Psaki or Nancy Pelosi, they're not talking about what really needs to be done, which is American oil and natural gas production. That's what we need. We need the pipeline. We need offshore drilling. We need drilling on federal lands. And that's what they're not talking about. So unless they're explicitly saying that, it seems to be a lot of kind of positioning. It's like another bumper sticker thing. American energy. Well, okay, but what does that really mean? What are you actually going to do about it?
Well, we'll get into all that. Anything else on the State of the Union address, other than it was, a couple hours of your life you'll never get back?
Yeah. Like I said, it was just gaslighting. It was fake optimism, and I think most people kind of saw through it. And his delivery is just so bad. I mean,
it's terrible.
It's so bad, and he's very clearly in like serious mental decline, a state of serious mental decline.
Well, he referred to the Ukrainians as the Iranians.
Right.
I think that should be something that should, make some people around him think about the 25th Amendment.
Right. Well, maybe they are. You never know.
Who knows?
Putin may circle Kyiv with tanks, but he'll never gain the hearts and souls of the Iranian people. He'll never extinguish their love of freedom, and he will never weaken the resolve of the free world.
We'll move on to energy here. And I have an invitation out to my Congressman, Sam Graves, who I've known for a long time, because I heard him on with my other friend, Chris Stegall. It's like, okay, well, we need to start going for some of these people too, get them on this podcast. But it was fascinating because Sam Graves, if you don't know this about him, is a big-time farmer up in the northern part of Missouri. And the 6th District, the way Missouri's carved up here, it comes down as a spike into Blue Springs. Blue Springs is the intersection of 3 different districts. 4, 5, and 6 intersect in Blue Springs. But 6 goes all the way up and then covers the top of Missouri, all the way from border to border, all the way over to Illinois, up to Iowa, Nebraska. And Sam's a big-time farmer. And Sam, I call this the farmer versus the buffoon. Because Sam Graves is on with Stegall talking about and breaking down farm-to-table expenses, while Biden, during the State of the Union, is singling out big meat as the issue.
Right.
One of Biden's other lines was telling employers, cut your costs, not your employees.
That was another thing. I'm glad you brought that up, because that was also a theme in the State of the Union, was him talking about cutting costs. And the way that we cut costs is we just cut costs.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do.
That's
Just
all
cut
you got to
costs.
do. That's it. The number one expense of most companies is employees.
Yeah.
So those two things don't go together. And again, this isn't Biden. Biden did not write this speech.
Right.
The brainiacs in the West Wing of the White House wrote this speech. So whenever he talks about big meat or big farm or whatever, there are other people behind the scenes who've written all this stuff. So Graves breaks it down, farm to table expenses, and talks about energy being the number one driver of costs for everything that we consume. And we're seeing that right now. You know, when Biden ran, he said, no one will get a tax increase who makes less than $400,000 a year. We're all seeing the Biden tax increase.
Right.
Because we are not energy independent.
Right.
And I thought Graves just slayed him in terms of how he talked about this cost or that cost. Things I don't know because I'm not a farmer. You're not a farmer.
Right.
You know, but it takes nitrogen to, you know, so
fertilize.
Thank you. Fertilize. Yeah. There's plenty of fertilizer going around. Why couldn't that come to me quickly? Okay. So fertilizer, nitrogen. And he says the cost of that has gone up threefold in the last year.
Yeah.
So what we're going to face after the harvest this year is even higher costs.
Yep.
You talk about a misery index. The Jimmy Carter era, the misery index, it was the combination of inflation and interest rates. Well, we don't have high interest rates right now, but inflation is ready to strangle us, and Sam Graves knows all about that. So I guess the question that I have out of all of this is, who do you trust in terms of this? Do you trust a guy who's a farmer and knows what goes into farming and knows what it gets or what goes into getting a loaf of bread out of the ground and into your supermarket and ultimately into your house? Or do you trust a guy who is not qualified to run a hot dog stand?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what I was about to say in terms of the environment, even, you know, in terms of environmental policy, not just energy and the supply chain and all that kind of stuff, but in terms of conservation, energy policy, environment, we should be trusting the people who actually are doing these things. You know, the farmers, the landowners, the ranchers, even the energy sector. I mean, I believe that they should have some sort of checks and balances for sure. But, you know, these people are interested in creating the cheapest, most efficient and cleanest product because it's in their own financial best interest. So I think that, you know, these people in Washington or wherever that have no connection to the land itself, you know, have no leg to stand on.
And the arrogance, just the flat ass arrogance of all of this, that they know what's best for all of us. It's almost like the old Soviet Union. The old Soviet Union, you had a small group of people, an inner circle, who made 5-year plans in every industry because they knew best. How did that work out?
Not good.
not well at all. And that's what's going on here. Where in leadership, you know, a good leader, and we've had some examples of great leaders, you know, we can't know everything about everything, okay? If I were president, for instance, I'm not a farmer. I mean, my ancestors were all farmers, but I'm not a farmer. So what I would do is I would bring in farmers. Tell me what's going on in your world.
Right.
How is this affecting you? How is this impacting you? And how can we help you? Not come to the table and say, I know everything about everything, and I'm just going to start signing executive orders because, you know, I'm the king.
Right.
We don't have a king in this country.
And it's not even just like it's Joe Biden, you know, by himself that pretends that he knows everything about farming and energy, but it's the entire bureaucratic establishment of Washington, D.C. It's the logical extent of intellectual, you know, highly educated liberals, you know, really is what it boils down to, because it's people who have gone through the pipeline of Washington, D.C. or gone through the pipeline of our higher education system. And they have all this information and they have all these degrees and they think they know what they're doing, but they don't have any real world experience. And then on top of that, they are corrupted by the mindset of the swamp, as Trump called it. They're corrupted by the mindset of Washington, D.C. into thinking that they have the knowledge and power that is necessary in order to tell Americans what to do. So it's not just Biden or even the White House. It's the entire establishment, you know.
The arrogance is just overwhelming. And I keep counting down to the midterm election. That will not be the be-all, end-all. To your point, I mean, when we started this podcast, we went through what the actual Constitution says the federal government ought to look like. It doesn't even closely resemble how it was set up.
Right.
And the multi-headed hydra just continues to grow and grow and grow. And unfortunately, when Republicans in recent years have had the majority, they've become K Street Republicans. They get buddy-buddy with those same people that you're talking about, and nothing changes.
Even Republicans that you could say were sort of liked, I guess, by a lot of conservatives or the right wing going into office have made some bad moves. I mean, Lindsey Graham comes to mind, or Dan Crenshaw, or some of these others. They fall into the trap of the establishment, and it's hard to get out. Once you fall in, it's hard to get out.
All right, well, backtracking, because I skipped all the way to the Soviet planning here, because you brought up a good point about that. But there are Democrats out there urging the president to waive his executive orders, holding domestic production back. Jen Psaki goes out there with a straight face, and she says, there are leases that aren't being used on federal land right now. Wonder why that's the case. Everything that Joe Biden has done since becoming president has put handcuffs on these companies.
Yeah, and it's also just the amount of federal land in the first place. I mean, I think it's Nevada or New Mexico. It's one of those two. I'm pretty sure it's Nevada, but it's like 80%, over 80% of the state is federal land.
That's Nevada.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are we doing with all that land? Is it just barren and useless, or is there something that can be done? Or is it because we're protecting a ground squirrel or something like that?
I don't know. But again, with what we're going through, what we're facing with a 14-year high in gas prices right now and going up, 14-year high as we're recording this, it could go up even higher to be an all-time high. Why is that not our national mandate to go forward and fix this right now instead of pussyfooting around with these people on the left?
Yeah. And I mean, it goes back to Ukraine because it gives them an out. It gives them something to blame it on besides their own policy and their own incompetence.
Right. Well, it's, and he's got this magical year of 2035 that by 2035, it's all going to be solar and wind. Well, what happens when the sun doesn't shine? What happens when the wind doesn't blow? Maybe there are, unicorns out there that are going to fart into a tube or something, and we're going to get energy that way. Why don't they let the private sector develop this with an all-in energy policy? The private sector works every time it's tried.
Yeah, and it's worked in America to create lower emissions than most of the rest of the industrialized world. If you look at the technology that we've developed for clean burning engines or for fracking and cleaner methods of extracting natural gas, we have the capacity, we have the technology, and we have the drive to continue to create American fossil fuels in a way that will put us above the competition of the rest of the world. And we just don't have the leadership and the willpower to actually do it because we're afraid of, seeming like we don't care about the environment.
And John F. Kennedy, they always talk about what's the moon shot. Well, it all relates back to a John F. Kennedy speech where he said this nation chooses to go to the moon by the end of the decade, and we're going to get there.
Yeah.
Okay. Why can't a Democrat president in the White House now, that's what we have for the next 1,000+ days, why can't he go out and give a speech that says we're going to get to that next energy whatever it is, whether it's fuel cell, whether it's nuclear, whether it's something that hasn't even been thought of yet. We're going to turn science loose and we're going to come up with it. But meanwhile, until we get there, fossil fuels is what will fuel this economy. It's what fuels the world right now.
Yeah.
We've got to get to a point again where we're energy independent, a net exporter of energy. So we're not counting on Russia and worried about what they're going to do on the world stage. We're not worried about Saudi Arabia, who, kind of likes us, kind of doesn't, depending on which day of the week it is. We can't count on people who don't like us necessarily. We've got to fend for ourselves.
Yep, absolutely. And until then, we have no leg to stand on with the Russia situation. I mean, I'll say it again, and maybe we can get into predictions. I don't know what you predict is going to happen with that, but until we really position ourselves in a place of strength with energy, and we have no pressure to put on them.
Yeah.
I mean, we have sanctions and stuff like that, but it's not going to do it.
My greatest fear, you want to talk about predictions, is that Ukraine is not the end of his appetite list. He wants to put the old Soviet Union together, and some of those countries are now NATO countries, which would invoke Article 5, and what will happen at that point. And I think we've talked about this, that he's playing chess on multiple layers, right? And we're playing checkers, if we're even playing anything as complicated as checkers right now. He's trying to divide and conquer with the NATO alliance. He's already tried that with Germany. And the question becomes, if he decides to put his tanks into a NATO country, who's going to stop him?
Not us. Not us. And it goes back to NATO. I mean, I think that we should be talking to Putin directly here. We should be talking to him directly, and we should be negotiating something. We should have talked to him leading up to this point, as Trump did, positioning ourselves in a place of strength and talking directly to Putin. Because again, as I mentioned last week, we have other bigger enemies that potentially will make moves as well, like China especially. And we need to make sure that Putin is on the side of not China rather than on the side of China moving forward. And it's just not looking good, because if he sees that he can step all over these European countries and step all over NATO. I mean, I posted a video I think I posted it on Facebook. If not, I will. But there's right when the invasion first happened, I think, or maybe shortly before, there was a video that got put out by NATO, and it was all about how diversity is our biggest strength, and we at NATO are diverse, and like we're gonna win the day. And it's just like so weak.
At NATO,
diversity
is our strength.
Nous parlons une multitude de langues.
Nous possédons des talents différents.
our own unique personalities.
We come from all over the world.
From every walk of life.
No two of us
are the same.
We work together.
Respect our needs.
Embrace our differences.
Because we all have one thing in common.
We are NATO.
It's so weak, and it's scary how weak it is, because, you know, at the end of the day, if we're going to take NATO seriously, then it's going to fall to America to provide the defense for NATO. And I'm not sure if we're in a position to do that, nor should we, if I'm being honest, you know, because we don't have our own stuff together.
To be continued. We'll look at it again next week and see where we are a week from now. Last week, I ended the episode talking about Star Trek and talk about the woke culture and all that. Mm-hmm. And we actually got an email from Jessica Winchell, because to frame it again, in case you missed it, I was talking about, you know, Star Trek, which was in 1966, the original Star Trek series. And they've had movies and other series all the way to now, where if you have Amazon Prime, well, I don't guess it's Paramount Plus. I have Paramount Plus that I get through Amazon Prime. I mean, it's so complicated now. You used to turn on a TV and it had like 4 or 5 stations on it, and that was the end of it. Now it's like very confusing. Star Trek Discovery is the latest iteration of the Star Trek universe, and they have launched 900 years into the future. Okay, so we talked about how Star Trek had a diverse cast. It represented what was going on at the time because of the civil rights movement. You had a black character, a black female character who had a role on the bridge. Mm-hmm. You had a Russian. You had someone from Japan. You had an American. You had an alien in Spock, the Vulcan, and they all worked together. And it was like, this is our hope for the future and all that. And what I get to on Star Trek Discovery is what they have phased out is the white heterosexual male.
Yes.
I mean, you know, other than Captain Kirk being kind of a horn dog and my hero when I was a young boy. William Shatner, Captain Kirk, was my hero because he always got the girl. That was about the only sexual reference you ever saw on Star Trek. Now with Discovery, it's all about woke sex. I'm serious. And you had reminded me about this because there was a story last week. LGBTQ plus representation on TV is at an all-time high. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we had that story. And I'm like, I could care less, right? But I'm wondering, where is the white heterosexual male? Because all of the white heterosexual males in the cast are either aliens or they're gay. Okay, that's just the way it is. Okay, so Jessica...
Or they're gay aliens.
Gay aliens. There was some of that in the last week, too. And then, I watched Discovery because I like Star Trek. I mean, I'm a Star Trek guy. Yeah. There are Star Trek people out there. Do not judge us. Mm-hmm. And it's not Trekkies, it's Trekors. You got to get that part right, too. All right? So there was an away mission, and they've got a trans. And honest to God, I don't know whether it's a boy or a girl. I mean, it is that...
It can be very confusing.
Very confusing.
Yes.
And now this person was in a relationship with a trans other person, but they're gone now. And so now this trans, and I think it's a girl, I really do, has feelings for the one of the females on the bridge. Mm-hmm. And, that's what the whole episode's about. It's the end of humanity as we know it because of some alien thing that's out there. But everybody's got their little moment of intimacy, and it's all gay or trans. There is no white heterosexuality going on in whatever century this is.
Why are you still watching this?
I don't know. That's what Jennifer tells me. Just turn it off. But I like Star Trek. Okay, so Jessica writes to me, Lorca and Pike were both white heterosexual males, even though they aren't in the current season. True. But I'm talking about the current season. She says, I do give them credit with Adira, the non-binary character not transgender that we're aware of. At least they are a host for a Trill symbiote, which by their established nature and lore would be the closest to being non-binary. In Deep Space Nine, we learned that Trill symbiotes inhabit both male and female Trill. The Dax symbiote had been joined with not just Jadzia and Ezra, but with male Trill as well. So at least it fits the story. Just thoughts from a fellow Star Trek fan.
That is,
and you're like rolling your eyes like, what the hell is all this?
I have no idea.
You're like, who gives a shit?
I just hear gay aliens, that's all.
So as we look toward the future, I can do this for the YouTube thing, right? Do you know what this is?
Yes.
All right. This is Live Long and Prosper.
With gay aliens.
Until next week, this is Dale Carter's America.
The views expressed on Dale Carter's America are Dale's and Kurt Wheeler's. They do not necessarily reflect the views of KFKF or Steel City Media. Comments can be sent to dalecartersamerica@gmail.com. Check back for weekly episodes. Subscribe, spread the word, and give us a 5-star review. Thanks for being a part of Dale Carter's America.